everybody. My name is Ed Hanley. I'm the Technical Sales Engineer for CSR Bradford here in this fair city of ours. Today we're going to be talking about BCA Section C fire resistance, specifically looking at how it affects insulation and sarking specifications. Are we ready? The objectives of this presentation are to understand the Building Code of Australia Section C fire requirements and how they work with insulation and sarking, gain an overview of the relevant standards that are referenced by the BCA and the information that we provide to you, and understanding how BCA Section C requirements and the reference standards affect the design requirements. So for BCA Volume 1, Class 2 to 9 buildings, commercial, we find insulation cropping up in the following areas: Section C, fire resistance, which we're looking at today; Section F, health and amenity; Section G, ancillary provisions or bushfire prone area construction; and your friend and mine, Section J, which is going to have a big change in a few months. Spoiler alert. So, how do we comply with the BCA? We've got to satisfy the performance requirements. BCA sets out a performance requirement and it sets out a path to achieve compliance. That can either be a performance-based solution, which the ABCB is very keen on, but I'm not sure if certifiers are with this particular area, or we have a deemed to satisfy solution. So DTS is, if you build it the way we say, then you are deemed to satisfy the compliance requirements. If you do an alternative solution, a performance-based solution, in this case, say through a fire engineer, I suppose certifiers either will or they will not accept it. My experience has been for things like appropriate use of sarkings, we want a deemed to satisfy solution only. That's just an observation. So a little caveat. Presentation is for BCA deemed to satisfy requirements for insulation and sarking materials. Obviously, a fire engineered performance-based solution is always an option. It's a very good option. Beware the term fire resistance. So the term fire resistance it's thrown about a bit, and it's used to cover a number of issues. Partly the reason this presentation was put together by a colleague of mine down south. We want to understand exactly what the intention is when someone says, have you got a fire-resistant wall back? Well, that's a good question. So we have to ask the right question and use the right terminology. And manufacturers like us will typically talk in terms of Australian standards that they have tested to and that they can give you a performance definition based on, rather than talking in terms of fire resistance. So we must be precise with our language when discussing BCA fire requirements. I'm sorry if that sounds a bit preachy, you're all big boys and girls, and I'm sure you know that, but it's just, sometimes we see things that we want fire resistance, but what they're actually after is something else entirely. So these are the Australian standards that have been basically ruling my life for the last 18 months. So a bit of background. 4 years ago in November, there was a fire in Melbourne, Lacrosse fire, South Bank fire, a pretty new building. It went up too quickly, I think is one way of putting it. Everyone got out, I think 450 odd people all got out. But it was seen as a bit of, oh, that was a bit vigorous. I think it started with a cigarette on a balcony and it spread too quickly. 18 months after that, the Victorian Building Authority produced a document, an analysis of sort of what happened, and in that it identified that basically everything in the wall that was doing what the wall was for, thermal performance, weatherproofing, had to be non-combustible, whereas the whole having to be non-combustible has been in the BCA for many years for external walls of the right buildings. It was perhaps something that wasn't being applied evenly and perhaps correctly. So this caused it to be looked at, and there were a few changes we had to make. I'm sure our friendly competitors had to make similar changes. We all started having a better understanding. And then we had the Grenfell fire a couple of years ago. That's not here in London, but it was a terrible, like 71 people was the final death toll. It was an old building, but it had been tarted up, for want of a better phrase. It had insulation applied to the outside, a foam product, and a new cladding, which, as we all know, the cladding has been the focus everyone's been looking at, with the PE backing to it. And that obviously led to a lot of introspection, I suppose, or concern, or analysis, or whatever you want to call it. We were all looking very heavily at this. We had a BCA amendment that came out about a year ago, March last year, and we've got a new BCA just around the corner. So these are the standards we're talking about, because this is what we've all been talking about, particularly the last 18 months or so. 1530 Part 1, combustibility. Just my boss at the back there. 1530 Part 1 is for combustibility of materials. 1530 Part 2 is for flammability index, typically for our sarkings. 1530 Part 3 is the early fire hazard properties of materials. And 1530 Part 4 is for fire tests on building materials, components and structures. And 5637 is determining fire hazard properties for wall and ceiling linings. I'm going to go into quite a bit of depth now, you'll be glad to know. So, 1530 Part 1, non-combustibility. The question is, how much energy is needed to cause a product to combust? We never used to send out test reports. We weren't dodgy, we just never had to. Occasionally I would stick an extract of a conclusion in an email to send to one of my architects, and that was fine. That all changed a few years ago with the little events, well, the big events I was just talking about. Now, test reports are a part of what I do, and I've probably sent 400 or 500 out in the last 12 months, and most of them, 90-odd%, I counted once, because I had a quiet afternoon, 90-odd% were to do with fire, and of those, a good 50% were this one, 1530 Part 1, non-combustibility. This is a test which is a simple pass-fail test, and it is for homogeneous products. So I can give you a wall bat, but I can't give you our anti-con faced blanket because you can't use it for assemblies. And also in the standard it says this test method, the test method is not applicable to products which are coated, faced or laminated. So I can't give you a non-combustible sarking, for example, even though we have a deemed to satisfy suitable sarking for non-combustible construction. So it's a test specimen, 50 mil thick, 45 mil diameter. You pop it in a little basket, you put that basket in a furnace at 750 degrees C for 30 minutes, and if it burns, it's combustible, and if it doesn't, it's non-combustible. There's the test rig. Now the 50 mil thick sample is important. For example, our acoustic guard, a glass wool partition roll, comes in a range of densities. The 11 kilo one, acoustic guard 11, marketing team, see, acoustic guard 11 kilos. That comes in a 50 mil, 75 mil, 110 mil and 165 mil. So there's one test because it's a 50 mil by 45 mil sample. So I can't give you a test for a 165 mil version. I can only, so it's a type of material. It's like the broad material. So the 11 kilo acoustic guard is a test we have, as is the 14, the 24, the 32. So when that test is carried out, pass products that pass, are unfaced rock wool. Now, in our old product guide, it used to say glass wool fibres are non-combustible. Now that's true, they are. But I don't give you a bag of fibres. We add stuff to it to make it stay together, which is quite important. We also do it to make sure the thickness is maintained and to maintain the density, because you've got to put more fibres in the same volume. That's what density is, you know that. So we add these things and all this stuff about when you're handling these things, called, you know, the various chemicals we have to use to make this product. So we don't give you just fibres, so I got that removed, because we give you a finished product. So unfaced rock wool. This binder is very low binder content in rock wool. That's just the way it's made. Unfaced, low density or low binder glass wool insulation. So our light and fluffy ceiling bats, our wall bats, which are all pretty low density, they're non-combustible. Now, Some of the higher density products, like down the bottom there, the bottom of the red, like our Supertel industrial board, which is 32 kilos, there's quite a lot of binder in it to make it stiff because it's used for inside HVAC. That is not non-combustible. So high binder can push it over the limit. So what I can say is that everything we use in a stud wall, so everything you use in an external or a partition wall or a common wall in a stud, which is our gold wall bats, our high performance, which are higher density gold bats, our sound screen bats, and our AcoustiGuard bats and rolls are all 1530 Part 1 compliant. And perhaps more importantly, I can prove it, because I've got a test report for each one. So please, if you're doing a project and you want the proof, because you know what certifiers can be like, I'm just a phone call away, or probably an email, because I tend to screen my calls a bit. Sorry, boss.